Hey guys, it's Jonas here with the Exam Revolution team, and in this Airlaw video we're going to look at Annex 14, Visual Aids for Navigation, but in this video we're going to specifically look at the different lights that you get and what ICAO Annex 14 says about the different lights that we find at and in and around the aerodrome. So what we're going to cover, we're going to work from ICAO Annex 14 now again, and we will look at lights. So let's quickly just recap on where we are in your ICAO Annex 14 journey so far. So by now you must know what the different indicators and signaling devices are, how they work, what they look like. We've also already covered the different markings that you get, the different runway markings, taxiway markings, all the painted lines basically in and around the aerodrome. Now obviously lights plays a significant role in visual aids for navigation, because when you are moving the aeroplane in and around the aerodrome, then lights can really help you to find the spot to park, or guide you onto a taxiway, or guide you onto the runway, or stop you from entering a runway. And that's why lights is so important as a visual aid for navigation, and that's why you really need to know the different types of lights and the specifics behind lights when it comes to the lights at the aerodrome. So the lights that we're going to look at in this video is going to be the emergency lights. Then we're going to look at aeronautical beacons. Those will be two quick ones. And then we're really going to deep dive into the different approach lights that you get, and then runway and taxiway lights. So those are the things that we're going to cover in this video. So let's start with emergency lights. Now, what is this? Emergency lights are lights that must be installed on a runway at an aerodrome which does not have a secondary power supply. Can you imagine you're sitting there on final approach onto the runway and suddenly there's a power outage and you just lose all of the lights on the runway? That will obviously be an issue, right? And that's why they say that emergency lights must be installed at an aerodrome where there's no secondary power or no backup power. Now, what must the color of these lights be? Well, these lights should as a minimum conform to the configuration required for a non-instrument runway, and colors should be the same as the standard runway colors. So in other words, the minimum lights that you need is the lights that would be required for a non-instrument runway. We'll have a look at that just now. And then also the colors should be the standard colors, right? So at an aerodrome where there is no secondary power, they actually should have two sets of lights. The main lights, and then once the power goes out and those main lights cannot run anymore, then they must have backup lights, which obviously works with either solar panels or batteries or whatever the case might be. And these are an example of backup lights. You can see they've got little solar power, panels. And then obviously that's how they then can be acting as backup power. So that is emergency lights. Okay, then let's move on to aeronautical beacons. So what is an aeronautical beacon? This is a beacon light which is installed at an aerodrome so that aircraft can identify the aerodrome at night. Now you get two types of aeronautical beacons. You get the aerodrome beacon, and then you get an identification beacon. So the aerodrome beacon shall be installed at an aerodrome to be used at night if one or more of the following conditions exist. Aircraft navigate predominantly by visual means, reduced visibilities are frequent, or it is difficult to locate the aerodrome from the air due to surrounding lights or terrain. So an aerodrome beacon, guys, is basically there so that when you fly to that aerodrome at night, it is easier for you to locate that aerodrome by just looking at the beacon. And you'll see what the beacon is now. It's a light basically just shining so that you can basically see where the aerodrome is. And then the color of an aerodrome beacon should be either colored flashes alternating white, or alternatively only white flashes. So it should be colored flashes at land aerodromes shall be green, and then water aerodrome shall be yellow. Okay, so that's how you can determine which one is which, right? A land aerodrome will have green flashes, and a water aerodrome will have yellow flashes, and that's called an aerodrome beacon. That's an example of one. You can see that as a green beacon, so it's basically rotating, almost like a lighthouse, right? Just on the land at an aerodrome. So that's an example of a green beacon rotating. Just makes it so much easier for you to locate the aerodrome when you overfly it at night. Then the identification beacon is slightly different to the aerodrome beacon. So the identification, this is a beacon light that identifies the specific airport, and it gives only green flashes for a land aerodrome and yellow flashes for a sea aerodrome. There are no white flashes permitted. And then also there's a Morse code. So the identification letter of the aerodrome, the ICAO designator, so whatever the ICAO designator of that aerodrome is, the four-letter identification code, that shall be transmitted via an international Morse code. So in other words, you can actually tune in and then you can listen if that Morse code is actually the designator of that aerodrome, and then you know it is that one. So that's how you can identify it. You look at the identification beacon, but then you can also listen to the Morse code. And these are what we call aeronautical beacons. Now, these aren't things that are used very often, because these days we have GPSs, we can exactly see where the airport is, we fly directly to it. When we overhead it, we can see the runway lights and all these things. But these aeronautical beacons are typically used at aerodromes where you really struggle to identify the airport. So you overfly it, you struggle to see the runway lights, it's maybe very dark around it, there might be lots of mountains or terrain or trees or things like that. And therefore you struggle to see the airport, and therefore they have these aeronautical beacons, which just makes it a little bit easier for the pilot to be able to see the aerodrome from a distance already, so that you know exactly where to fly to. So that is aeronautical beacons. Now let's move on to the big one, which is our approach lights. So what is it? Approach lights are installed to help the pilot identify the section before the runway on which he or she is landing, and to align the aircraft correctly with the runway, especially at night or in instrument conditions. Now, the type of approach lights that we have is runway dependent. Okay, so the type of approach system installed is dependent on the runway usage and what the airport is intended for. Now, there are mainly 4 types. So you get a non-instrument approach runway. That's like a normal VFR field, right? So if you have a VFR field, visual flying conditions field, where it's just civilian aircraft, flying in good weather, then that will have a specific approach lighting system. If it needs one, it might not even need one, but that will be a non-instrument approach runway. Then you get a non-precision approach runway. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail when it comes to the different approaches in this video, but a non-precision approach runway is one that is a little bit higher than a non-instrument approach runway, because now you have an instrument approach at this runway, but it's not the best one yet. It's called a non-precision approach runway. And then you get a precision approach runway category 1, and you get a precision approach runway category 2 or 3. So the highest precision approach that you get, and the one that is most accurate, and where the pilots can fly into the worst weather, is called a category 3 precision approach runway. Now that would obviously be the runway with the best lights, right? Because the worst conditions is found when you fly that precision approach into that runway. So the lowest category of runway that you get is non-instrument approach. Highest that you get is category 3 precision approach runway. And we're going to look at the approach light according to those runway categories. Okay, so for a non-instrument runway, where practicable, a simple approach lighting system should be installed. It's not a requirement, it's just where it is practicable. Then your non-precision approach runway, where practicable, a simple approach lighting system should be installed over there as well. And remember guys, these are all recommendations from Annex 14, right? Then precision approach runway for a category 1, where practicable, a precision approach cat 1 lighting system should be installed. So there's a very specific type of approach system that is called a cat 1 lighting system, okay? And then for a precision approach category 2 or 3 runway, you must install a category 2 or 3 lighting system. All right. So there's an example of a proper instrument approach runway. You can see all those nice lights. Looks like a Christmas tree. Beautiful to fly into that at night. So we will take this runway and we're really going to dissect it into its different component parts and see what each of these lights are, how they work, what the requirements are, and so on and so forth. So let's have a look at a simple approach lighting system. The one that you just saw is obviously not a simple one, right? So this lighting system is not required if the aerodrome is only used in good visibility or if other guidance is in place. Guidance meaning, if there's enough guidance to guide you onto the runway, then you don't need an approach lighting system. If the runway has got good enough lights and they are comfortable that the pilots can line themselves up, then a simple approach lighting system is not needed. Okay, now the look and feel of this. A simple approach lighting system have a row of lights on the extended center line at 60 meters or 30 meters intervals, and a crossbar light up to 30 meters long, 300 meters from the threshold. I know it's important to give you little pictures of what they look like. Now there's an example, right? And you'll see the dimensions is 60 meters or 30 meters intervals. That's how far the lights should be from each other. And then it should run at least 300 meters from the threshold. That's where the crossbar must start. So you can see the crossbar is the one that makes the T, the horizontal lights, right? So that must be 300 meters from the threshold, and it can be a single line of lights. That is a simple approach lighting system. And then this crossbar must be at least up to 30 meters long. So 300 meters from the threshold and at least up to 30 meters long or wide. That was a simple approach lighting system. Then if we look at a category 1 approach lighting, this lighting system is required for all runways with a category 1 ILS approach. So you cannot have a category 1 ILS approach on a runway if that runway does not have the following lights, right? Otherwise it's illegal. So what is the look and feel of a category 1 approach lighting system? They have extended center lines to 900 meters with gaps less than 30 meters. So the lights go up to 900 meters from the runway on the approach end, and the gaps must be less than 30 meters between the lights. And it also has 5 times 30 meter crossbars 300 meters from the threshold with gaps which are less than 6 meters in between. So then also the sources from 0 to 300 meters. And once again, guys, I know there's a lot of figures to remember here. Don't stress, don't freak out. It's all okay. Once you see the pictures, you'll be able to remember it. It's really not that difficult, and you're not going to get tested on these very specifics. You might get a question here or there, but we obviously need to give this to you so that we can make sure that you understand what it's all about and that you know the technical aspects, right? So from 0 to 300 meters, there should be one light source. You'll see now, I'll show you the one light source. It's just a single light. Then from 300 meters to 600 meters from the runway, there should be 2 light sources. So it's 2 lights next to each other. And then from 600 to 900 meters, there should be 3 light sources. So it's actually 3 lights next to each other. And then if one light source is used for the whole distance, there should be crossbars every 150 meters. So you can use one light source, but if that is the case, then there should be crossbars every 150 meters instead of every 300 meters. And this is what a Cat 1 approach lighting system would look like. So there you can see it's 900 meters in total length from the runway threshold on the approach end. So you'd obviously fly across this approach lighting system when you land on runway 03. Okay, so it's 900 meters. Then the first 300 meters should have a single light source. So you can see the middle lines, those are all single light sources, right? The first 300 meters. So the vertical line on my screen, you can see the middle line, those are single light sources. Then from 300 meters to 600 meters, now it's 2 light sources. So you can see in the middle there are 2 lights next to each other. And then from 600 meters to 900 meters, so the last 300 meters of the approach lighting system, you can see there are 3 light sources. The middle row is now 3 lights next to each other. Okay, and that's what I meant with that. Then a category 2 or 3 approach lighting system. So this lighting system is required for all runways with a Cat 2 or Cat 3 ILS approach, right? So this is a little bit, it's one step higher than the category 1 approach. So the look and feel of this, a category 2 or 3 approach lighting system, have the category 1 lighting system plus 2 red side rows extending 270 meters from the threshold, and then 2 crossbars at 150 meters and at 300 meters extending 15 meters from the center line and runway touchdown zone lights 900 meters into the runway. So it's got the category 1 approach lighting system, but then there's a few added lights. Let's have a look at what that looks like. There you can see those are the red lights that we talked about. So remember, the Cat 1 does not have to have those red lights over there. Okay, they are 150 meters for up until the first crossbar, those red lights, and then 300 meters up until the second crossbar. Then in total, it's 900 meters of approach lights. And then also very important, you must have 900 meters of touchdown zone lights or to the midway of the runway, whichever is less. Okay, so if the runway is obviously 2,000 meters long, midway would be 1,000 meters. You don't have to have the touchdown zone lights up until 1,000 meters. You can just go to 900 meters. But if the runway is 1,800 meters long, then obviously you'd go halfway, right? Because then halfway is 900 meters. And those are touchdown zone lights over there. You can see it's basically white lights that are placed in the touchdown zone area, and it must be at least 900 meters in length. And that is where the pilots then can clearly see where the runway threshold is starting and where the zone is to touch down. You do not want to touch down later than where those light ends. Then we can talk about culvert lighting. So this is a name used for an approach lighting system with 5 crossbars and 1, 2, and 3 light units on the center line. Adding lights to this system, you'll get a category 1, 2, or a 3 system. So in other words, guys, if you see that they talk about a culvert lighting system, it's a very basic category 1 system, but it does not qualify for a category 1 approach lighting system. So it's one below category 1 approach lighting system. It's a very basic category 1 approach lighting system, but there needs to be a few lights added for it to become a category 1 approach light system. So what does the culvert lighting system looks like? It's got 5 crossbars with 1, 2, and 3 light units on the center line. And that's what it would look like. Okay, so it's gone from there to there. You can see we've added an extra light. See that second crossbar now? If I go forward again, you'll see there's extra white lights. So that's a culvert lighting system. Then approach path indicators. Lights can also be installed next to the runway to show the pilots if they are on the correct approach path or whether they are low or high on the approach. So the lights that we just had a look at helps us with the approach to line up with the runway and to make sure we know where the runway is. But then obviously we need to make sure that vertically we're on the correct approach or on the correct glide. And that's what approach path indicators do. They actually help us to make sure that we're on the correct glide. Now you get 2 main types. You get a VARSI, which is called a visual approach slope indicator, or you get a PAPI, which is precision approach path indicator. If you look at a VARSI, these are installed if turbojets use the runway and if there is inadequate or misleading visual guidance, if there are obstacles or if there is a bad weather or terrain. So if a runway is used by turbojet aircraft and they don't feel like the pilots would be able to line themselves up correctly vertically or on the glide with the runway, then they will install VARSIs, which is a visual approach slope indicator, which helps the pilot to look at these lights and to make sure that they're on the correct approach or on the correct glide. The configuration for VARSIs are usually configured with 2 sets of lights behind each other, positioned on the left-hand side of the runway. Okay, and let me show you what that would look like. That is a VARSI. Now, if you look at that runway 09, you can see in the front you've got 2 lights, on the back you've got 2 lights, and in this case, you've got in the front 2 white lights, and then in the back you've got 2 red lights. Okay, that means you're on glide. In other words, you're on the correct glide to this runway. However, if you are too high, you will have 4 white lights. So then you need to come down a little bit and you'll see that the back 2 lights will then start to turn red. Then you're on the correct glide again. If you are too low, your runway would obviously look like that. You would be very close to the threshold and then you would have 4 red lights. So you need to decrease your rate of descent a little bit and increase your altitude a little bit, or descend slower, and then you would get back to the on glide approach, which would have 2 white in the front and then 2 red in the back. So those are the different scenarios that you get with a VARSI. And obviously you would want to aim for the middle one, right? So all you do is you constantly look at those lights and then you adjust your rate of descent accordingly. And if you just follow those lights, you will land at the correct spot on the runway, exactly in the touchdown area where you should touch down. Remember guys, when you fly into certain aerodromes, it can be very deceiving, right? If the runway is sloping badly, or if it is situated on a hill, or if there is lots of terrain and trees and things around it, then it can be that, you know, you're missing out a little bit, or your judgment is a little bit incorrect and that you're too high or too low. And that's why they would then install VARSIs. So it doesn't mean that you can fly in instrument conditions. It's just a visual way of helping you approach the runway correctly. So there's also what we call a T-VARSI and an AT-VARSI system. So T-VARSI and AT-VARSI. Then the T-VARSI have 20 lights in total. It's 10 on each side of the runway. And then the AT-VARSI has 10 lights only on one side of the runway. So the T-VARSI has 20 lights, 10, 10. And the AT-VARSI has only 10 lights on one side of the runway. And this is what they look like. So that's your T-VARSI over there. You can see it's 20 lights in total, 10 on the left, 10 on the right. And for you to be on the correct approach, that is what you want to see. And that's why they're called T-VARSIs, right? Because you can see it makes a T. The red is a T on the left and on the right hand side. and then you know you are on the correct approach. Okay, that's the T-VARSI. And then the AT-VARSI is where you just lose the one on the right hand side, you just have it on the left hand side. And guys, it's quite obvious why these things are located on the left hand side, because the captain or the commander of an aircraft or the pilot in command usually sits on the left hand side, so it's easy for him to see the lights. So that's an AT-VARSI, and to be on the correct approach, that's what it would look like. You can see it forms a T. Alright, so those are the AT and the T-VARSIs. Now, if we look at PAPIs, what are PAPIs? These are precision approach path indicators, and they are used to guide the aircraft to be on the correct approach for a precision instrument approach like an ILS. So the difference between a PAPI and a VARSI is that a PAPI is actually used in instrument conditions, where a VARSI is used in visual conditions. Okay, although both of them show you how to approach the runway correctly, a PAPI is used in instrument conditions. Now, PAPIs are normally on the left hand side. They consist of 4 wing bar lights next to each other. Instead of 2 and 2, they fall next to each other, and they're usually located on the left hand side of the runway, but it can be installed on both sides if there's space. Or if there's something that is blocking the PAPIs on the left hand side, then they'll move them non-standard to the right hand side, but that is not the normal thing to do. That's an exception. Okay, so that's PAPIs, and then you also get APAPIs. So these are PAPIs but with only 2 wing bar lights instead of 4 lights. So let me show you what a PAPI looks like. That would be a PAPI, a precision approach path indicator. And when you see 2 white lights, very important, white lights will always be shown on the outer side of the runway or of the light system. So you'll have your white lights on the left hand side in this case, and the red ones will be closest to the runway. So in this case, you're actually on the correct glide. You want to see 2 white, you want to see 2 red, then you're exactly on the correct approach. Okay. Then you can also find that at some airports they put them on the right hand side as well, so the co-pilot can also see on his side the PAPIs easily. And once again, you can see the red lights will always be closest to the runway. You'll never have the white lights on the inside and the red lights on the outside. That's important. Now guys, if you see it like that, you are way too low. Okay, that means you're very low on the approach. You need to decrease your rate of descent. If you see that, it means you are slightly low. So 3 red, 1 white means you're slightly low, and then that's what you want to see. 2 white and 2 red, that means you're on the correct approach. And then obviously 3 white and 1 red means you're slightly high on the approach. And then obviously if you have 4 whites, that means you're very high on the approach. So you need to increase your rate of descent and come a little bit lower. All right, that's how PAPIs help you. And you just keep an eye on them as you fly the approach, and you make sure that you adjust your rate of descent accordingly. And then you have a look at seeing 2 reds and 2 whites, and then you know you're on track. So there's an example of a runway with PAPIs. You can see on the left hand side, we've got PAPIs, and on the right hand side. On the left hand side, you can see the 2 white lights on the left, and then 2 red lights closer to the runway, and then the PAPIs on the right hand side, same story. You can see the red lights are closest to the runway, and your white lights are on the outer side of the 4 lighting system. So that's what PAPIs look like. And in this case, you can see that you're exactly on the correct approach path, and then you're going to touch down in the touchdown zone area where you should be. Okay, so that was PAPIs. Then if we talk about lead-in lights, some airports are required to have lead-in lights for aircraft, so to guide the aircraft onto the runway during the approach. This is not something that you see very often. However, they typically use lead-in lights in cities where the airport is almost like in the middle of the city, and where there's a lot of very bright lights around the airport. So you really struggle to see the runway lights and the approach lights just because there's so much going on. That's typically where they use lead-in lights, in cities that's got a lot of bright lights. Now, it comes in groups. Lead-in lights are usually groups of lights that guide the aircraft onto the runway, and the spacing between the lights are less than 1,600 meters. Okay. Then the pattern, the lead-in lights can be curved or straight depending on what is required for the runway and the approach. Guys, it's awesome to fly with lead-in lights. It's really quite cool. Now, what are these lights, or what do they look like? They're flashing lights. So these lights are flashing white lights towards the runway in groups of 3. So you always find them in groups of 3, and they always flash towards the runway. So they actually guide you to fly towards the runway. So yeah, let me show you a little video. Look there at the bottom. So there you can see the lights flashing. You can see right here next to the road, there's a few lights. There they take the autopilot off. You'll now start to see them turning towards the right hand side. And you can see there's lots of lights in this area, right? So that's obviously why they have these lead-in lights. You can hear the guys talking in the background a little bit there. And then you just keep on flying towards the, this is at JFK, you just keep on flying towards the next set of lights. And you can see it's 3, right? Then groups of 3. You can see that one that they're flying towards now. Where it begins, it's got a flash, then in the middle it's got a flash, and then the last third light is also a flash again. So that's all you do. You just line up with the lights at all times. And you can see as soon as you've gone over the light set of lights that you've been flying towards, you can already see the next set of lights. And there you start to see the approach lights as well towards the runway there, where that last flashing light is. You can see now, you can start to see the runway there, right? Now you can just imagine how difficult it would be to find this runway in this city because of all the lights that's going on around the runway. You can see the poppies on the left hand side as well. They're lined up nicely. You can see the approach lights, the green threshold lights you can see as well. And there it basically is. Now they've lined up with the runway using lead-in lights. You can see the touchdown zone lights. These are these small little lights of 3 sets on the right and on the left hand side of the center line. And those solid white blocks are your aiming point markers. And there we touch down. Alright, so there you've seen the lead-in lights, guys. So yeah, there we've covered the approach lights, all the different approach lights that you get. I know it was quite a mouthful, but like I've said, just take your time. Don't stress about it too much. As long as you have the information that you need, you can always refer back to this video when you struggle with questions, and then you're just going to get the information in it, or you can use the QRN. Okay, then let's move on to runway and taxiway lights. This is also a very interesting one. So, different lights. A runway's form and dimensions are indicated using different lights, which consist of threshold identification lights, edge lights, threshold and wing bar lights, end lights, centerline lights, touchdown zone lights, rapid exit taxiway lights, and stopway lights. That's a mouthful, right? So you can see there's quite a few lights that can be put on the runway. Once again, depending on what you use the runway for. Do they have instrument approaches or not? Is it only a small runway? Is it a large runway? And so let's have a look at all of these different types of lights that you get. The first one that we're going to talk about is threshold identification. That's obviously important. These lights should be installed at the threshold when additional threshold conspicuity is necessary. Okay, so in other words, when you really need to see the threshold properly, if the surrounding areas has got a lot of light and you struggle to see the threshold, then they need to install threshold identification lights so you can see it properly. Now the location, they shall be located symmetrically about the runway center line, in line with the threshold, and 10 meters outside each line of the runway edge lights. Okay, then the color, these lights should be flashing white lights and only visible in the direction of the approach runway. So you mustn't be able to see it from the other side or from a taxiway. It's only from the approach. It must just shine towards the approach path of the aeroplane. Okay, and if you look at that runway over there, the threshold identification lights, you can see in this case you don't really need them, right? Because you can clearly see where the threshold starts. However, if they had to put threshold identification lights, it would be white flashing lights like that on the side there. And obviously it must be 10 meters from the edge lights of the runway, which you can see is on the inner side of these threshold identification lights. Okay, then there's an exam example. Threshold identification lights are, and then it's flashing white lights in line with the runway. That would be the answer. Okay, then let's move on to edge lights. So that was the threshold identification lights. Edge lights shall be installed for runways intended for use by night, or a precision approach runway intended for use by day or night. So if you've got a precision approach runway, you must have edge lights. Whether you're using it only in the daytime, it doesn't matter. You must have edge lights. Okay. Then the operating minimum, if the runway is intended to be used for takeoff in conditions of less than 800 meters RVR, it must have edge lights. RVR stands for runway visual range. That means if you stand on the runway, how far can you see down the runway? They measure that with a transmissometer, which are these, almost looks like cameras that they put on the side of the runways, and that measures the distance that you can see down the runway. So if the runway is intended to be used in conditions of less than 800 meters runway visual range, then you must have edge lights. Okay, it's obviously so you can see properly where the edges of the runway are. Then the location, these lights shall be on the edges of a runway in full length of the runway, and spacing intervals shall be not more than 60 meters for an instrument runway and not more than 100 meters on non-instrument runways. So that's the maximum distance that you can have between edge lights. Then the color of the light shall be white except for displaced thresholds where it will be red, and for the last 600 meters of the takeoff runway it may be yellow. So then they just change the color of the edge light so that you can see you nearing the end of the runway. So typically the last 600 meters of the runway, they change the edge lights from white to yellow so that the pilot can see, oops, I'm starting to approach the end of the runway. Let me show you what they look like. So those are the edge lights over there. You can see here in the beginning, they don't really look white, but they are white. And then towards the end there, the last 600 meters, they will start to turn yellow. Then that was edge lights. Then threshold and wing bar lights. So runway threshold lights shall be provided for a runway equipped with runway edge lights, except on a non-instrument or non-precision approach runway where the threshold is displaced and wing bar lights are provided. Okay. Then what are wing bar lights? Wing bar lights should be provided on a precision approach runway when additional conspicuity is considered desirable. Wing bar lights shall be provided on a non-instrument or non-precision approach runway where the threshold is displaced and runway threshold lights are required but are not provided. So guys, when they move the threshold, remember they've put threshold lights in, right? But let's imagine that they move the threshold, they displace it further into the runway because of construction or whatever. They can't move all those lights and put them at the new spot where the threshold is temporarily. That's why they have to put wing bar lights so that you as a pilot can then see where the threshold actually starts, right? So then you don't look at the threshold lights, you just look at the wing bar lights. I'll show you what they look like just now. Then the location, they shall be placed at right angles to the edge lights and must have at least 5 lights extending at least 10 meters outward on each side of the runway. So 5 lights on the right, 5 lights on the left, and they must go 10 meters outwards. So basically 2 meters spacing between them. And that's an example of wing bar lights, right? In the beginning you can see 5 lights on the right, it's green lights, 5 lights on the left hand side, and then towards the end of the runway, once again 5 lights, but now they're red because it's the end of the runway. Right, so there you can see them, and then here's another example of them, right? You can see there are 5 lights in the beginning and then 5 lights in the end. However, in the beginning of the runway, it's obviously going to be green. At the end, it will be red. That is what wing bar lights look like. Now, can you see why they've put wing bar lights here? Because we don't have any threshold lights. So how do you know where the threshold starts, right? They've only got edge lights in this case on runway 18. So they have to put wing bar lights because they need to show the pilots where the threshold starts. Then runway end lights. So we've covered edge lights, we've covered threshold lights, we've covered wing bars. Now runway end lights. So how do we see where the end of the runway is? End lights shall be provided for a runway equipped with runway edge lights. So you must have end lights if you've got edge lights. Okay. The location, they shall be located at right angles to the center line as close as possible to the end of the runway. I just want to go one bullet back. Why do you need runway end lights if you've got a runway that's got edge lights? Well, you obviously need to show the guys where the runway stops. Can you imagine you have edge lights, but you don't have end lights? Like, you don't know where the runway stops, right? That's why they have to put end lights. So as soon as a runway's got edge lights, they have to put end lights to show where it stops. And the same with threshold lights to show where it starts. So they shall be at right angles to the center line as close as possible to the end of the runway. And then the colors should be red, and they shall consist of at least 6 lights in total. And that's an example of, obviously this is a category 1 or 2 or 3 approach runway. You can see them right at the end there. They are red runway end lights. Okay. Then this is an example of a question. A line of red lights across the runway width indicates, and the answer would be the stop end of the runway. You won't have any other red lights on the runway unless it is for the stop end. Okay, the other lights will never be red. Then that was end lights. Let's now look at centerline lights, because when we land, we don't want to veer off the runway, right? We want to make sure we know where the centerline of the runway is. So centerline lights. Runway centerline lights shall be provided on runways that is used for takeoff in conditions where the RVR is 400 meters or less, or which accommodate aircraft with high landing speeds, or where the edge lights have spacings more than 50 meters apart. That's when you would need runway centerline lights. Now guys, if a specific aerodrome does not comply with these, in other words, let's say it's an aerodrome that's only used in good weather conditions, even if it's at night, and the RVR is never, the aerodrome is never going to be used in conditions of less than 400 meters RVR. If they want to put centerline lights, nothing stops them from putting it. This is just a recommendation for the minimum requirements, right? If the aerodrome is going to be used in cases like this, then they must have centerline lights. But if you want to put centerline lights on your aerodrome or your strip on the farm somewhere, that's beautiful. You can put centerline lights. The location, they shall be placed along the centerline, but may be offset by a maximum 60 centimeters from the centerline. Why would they want to do that? Because if you're taxiing on the centerline or landing, if a nose wheel of an aircraft goes over these lights, it's quite irritating actually. So that's why they're allowed to move them up to 60 centimeters from the centerline. So that when you are on the centerline with your nose wheel, like you should be, then you don't hear that click, 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 click as you go over the lights all the time. And then the spacing should be 15 meters, but if the runway is only used when the RVR is more than 350 meters, the spacing may be increased to a maximum of 30 meters. So then the spacing between the lights can be 30 meters. That's centerline lights. Then the colors, these lights shall be variable white to a point 900 meters from the opposite end threshold. So if you're taking off from the opposite end threshold 900 meters back, they should be white, variable white. What does variable white mean? It just means that the controller, the air traffic controller, can actually adjust the brightness of the light. They can actually adjust the brightness of all the lights on the runway. So I should have said right in the beginning that all the lights should be variable, right? Because if it's too bright for your eyes, they must be able to tune it down a bit. So they must extend variable white up to a point 900 meters from the opposite end threshold, and then alternate red and white to 300 meters before the opposite end threshold, and then the last 100 meters shall be red for the centerline lights. So you initially have them variable white, then 900 meters before the end, they start to turn red and white alternating, and then 300 meters before the end of the runway, the centerline lights just become red. Okay, that's what they look like. So there you can see, you're going to struggle to see a little bit on this picture how they change in color, but you can definitely initially see the centerline lights here is in the beginning it's white, and then there towards the end you can see, if you look carefully, you can see that they start to alternate white and red, and then right towards the end you can see there's a small little piece that's only red. That's the last 300 meters of the runway where the centerline lights are only red. Then if the runway is less than 1,800 meters in length, then the alternate red and white lights should extend from the midpoint of the runway to 300 meters before the end, because then you can't have the last 900 meters of alternating red and white, right? Then you must just have it from the midpoint. That's if the runway is less than 1,800 meters. Then that was centerline lights. So let's move on to touchdown zone lights. This is obviously the area where you touch down on the runway. So these lights shall be provided for runways where category 2 or 3 instrument approaches can be conducted. Okay, the distance, these lights shall extend from the threshold to a distance of 900 meters. So on the landing threshold, up until 900 meters from that threshold, except on runways which are less than 1,800 meters, it shall be shortened to less than half of the runway length. Because you don't want to give, touchdown zone lights up until midway to the runway, because then the pilots think, well, they can still touch down halfway down the runway, and it shouldn't be like that, right? So for long runways, it's up until 900 meters that they extend. If the runway is less than 1,800 meters, then these threshold lights, the touchdown zone lights, must start before halfway. Then these lights should be barretts symmetrically located along the center line of the runway and should have spacing of either 30 meters or 60 meters. I'll show you what a barrett is now. These lights should be variable white lights. Intensity can be changed. Like I've said earlier, the ATC can change the brightness of the lights. And remember that a barrett of lights, they comprise of 3 lights together with a spacing of not more than 1.5 meters between lights. So let me show you what touchdown zone lights look like. There you can see them. So in this case, you can see it definitely is barretts, because you can see it's a row of 4 lights, right? So it must be a minimum of 3 lights, not spaced further than 1.5 meters apart. You can see in this case, it's a row of 4 lights on the right hand side and on the left hand side, and they go up until 900 meters onto the runway from the landing threshold. So those are your touchdown zone lights. Now, one also gets simple touchdown zone lights, which helps to improve situational awareness in any visibility conditions. The function of these lights are to help enable pilots to decide whether to commence a go-round if the aircraft has not landed by a certain point on the runway. So the ones that I've just shown you guys, those are quite fancy touchdown zone lights. You get simpler ones. I'm going to show you what they look like just now. But they do install them on a runway sometimes so that to help the pilots decide, if they've not landed by the end of those touchdown zone lights, then they must do a go around. Otherwise, they're going to land too deep into the runway. And that's why they sometimes put simple touchdown zone lights on smaller runways. So if that's what it looks like, the runway, then simple touchdown zone lights would be those white lights that you see over there, those little round ones. And now obviously you know by now the touchdown zone markings, those are those 3 blocks on the left and 3 blocks on the right hand side. And your lights is actually after them, right? So simple touchdown zone lights would look like that, 2 on the left, 2 on the right. And then they would be 0.3 meters from those touchdown zone markings. And they would be spaced 1.5 meters or half the width of the marking, whichever is greater. So that's how they would place them. And if you overfly that, then you must know you must do a go around. That's called simple touchdown zone markings. That's obviously, for runways that is mainly used in visual conditions where they don't need proper touchdown zone lights. So that was touchdown zone lights. Then let's move on to RETILs. What does RETIL stand for? It stands for Rapid Exit Taxiway Indicator Lights. Now, a rapid exit taxiway, I'll show you guys now what it looks like. But it is a taxiway that doesn't go 90 degrees off the runway. It actually goes at like a 45-degree angle so that you don't have to slow down so much to turn. You can actually still be at 50 or 60 knots when you go onto that taxiway. And it obviously helps with traffic congestion on the runway because the ATC can get the aircraft off the runway quite quickly. So that's called a rapid exit taxiway. Now they need to have very specific lights. So it's called RETILs, Rapid Exit Taxiway Indicator Lights. It indicates where the rapid exit taxiway is. So they are there to provide pilots with distance to go information to the nearest rapid exit taxiway on the runway, which helps with situational awareness and enable pilots to apply correct braking action for more efficient rollout and runway exit speeds. So that's what RETILs do. They just give you an indication of how far is the rapid exit taxiway still to come. Then when are they used? RETILs should be installed on runways intended to be used for 350 meters RVR or less, and or where the traffic density is high, right? Because when traffic density is high, you want pilots to be able to judge correctly, right? And that's why you want to give them these lights so that they can judge their distance to the rapid exit taxiway correctly, because exactly 2 minutes behind you, there's another aeroplane waiting to land, right? Then the location, these lights shall be on the same side of the runway center line as the associated rapid exit taxiway. So if you look at the center line of the runway, if the rapid exit taxiway is to the left-hand side, then these rapid exit taxiway lights, the RETILs, must be on the left-hand side of the runway center line so you can see where it's going. If it's on the right, then it must be on the right-hand side of the center line. Then the color of RETILs should be yellow lights located 2 meters apart, and the light nearest to the center line shall also be 2 meters from the center line. Let me show you what they look like. So there is an example of runway 27 right. I think this was at Heathrow. That over there, that green block, is an example of a rapid exit taxiway. You can see it goes at like a 45-degree angle. So if you get to the end of the runway, you can actually go off quite quickly. You can see the one before that is like a 90-degree turn, right? You can't be that fast on that turn. So that would be a rapid exit taxiway. Now they need to indicate to you how far that is to come by means of lights. So what would they do? They would add lights like that. So it's typically 3 lights, then 2, and then 1 lights. And the dimensions of them should be 2 meters apart from each other. And the closest light to the center line must be 2 meters. Okay. And as you can see, they indicate to you that this taxiway is on the right-hand side. Why? Because the lights are on the right-hand side of the runway center line. If the rapid exit taxiway was to the left, then those lights was supposed to be put on the left-hand side of the center line. But that's typically what RETILs look like, the yellow lights indicating a rapid exit taxiway. Then stopway lights. These lights shall be provided for a stopway intended to be used at night. Okay, now remember guys, a stopway is not part of your normal operation for takeoff and landing on a runway. A stopway is actually there to assist you in an emergency. So like if you take off and you have an engine failure before you rotate and you close the power and you apply brakes, but you can't stop before the end of the runway, typically they have a stopway area, which is, provided to help stop the aircraft and gives a little bit more distance apart from the runway. And therefore, you must have stopway lights if it is intended to be used at night, right? So that you can see where the stopway is and where the runway ends. So, location, these lights shall be along the full length of the stopway and one row at right angles to the runway to show the end of the stopway. And the color of these lights should be red, and it must only be visible in the direction of the runway. So in other words, if you take off, you must be able to see the stopway lights, the red lights. But if you come into land, you mustn't be able to see the red lights, because that's really going to confuse you, right? So it must only be visible in one direction. And that's what they will look like. So it's obviously in the direction of the red arrow. If you take off in the direction of the red arrow, so that would be runway 09, then you would see those red lights around the stopway area over there. Okay, and that would then indicate where the stopway ends. Obviously, there would be red lights on the end of the runway as well, right? So that you can clearly see, okay, that's where the runway ends, and then the red lights around the block of the stopway would indicate where the stopway is. Then centerline lights. This is now for taxiways, right? So we're done with all of the runway lights. Let's move on to taxiway lights. Taxiway centerline lights. They shall be provided on a taxiway which will be used in RVR conditions of less than 350 meters, except that these lights are not needed where the traffic density is light and taxiway edge lights and centerline markings provide adequate guidance. So that's when you don't need them. Then you don't need the centerline lights on the taxiway. So if there's edge lights, so that the pilots can see where the edges of the taxiways are, and if they've got good markings and it can be, shown that the pilot would be able to see properly, then no centerline lights are needed. But otherwise, they're needed. Now, centerline lights should be green. In the case of a taxiway line on the runway leading the aircraft off the runway, the light should be alternate yellow and green until the aircraft is clear of the runway. So it should be yellow and green. And the reason for that is obviously just, to keep the pilots aware, because you're still on the runway. So that's why they're alternating them green and yellow. Now, there's an example, guys. This is a very nice picture. We're going to work off this picture. It comes directly out of Annex 14. You can see on the right hand side you've got your runway, right? I've put the word there, runway. So you can see those are the centerline lights on the runway, those white circles there. Then you can see where the green arrow is showing you on that rapid exit taxiway. You can see the green centerline lights there on the taxiway, right? So those green dots over there, those are your centerline lights. But then look over there, where they are alternating. As you go off the runway, you can see the first one at the bottom is the rapid exit taxiway. You can see how they're alternating green, yellow, green, yellow, green, yellow. Obviously, where if you look at the yellow lights on the rapid exit taxiway, you'll see that one side of it is actually green with two little lines pointing in the direction of the taxiway. That's obviously if you come from the other side, then you would be able to see the green lights because they will lead you onto the runway then. But if you exit from the runway onto the taxiway, you would see the green, yellow lights. And then at the top as well, you can see the same thing where you don't have the taxiway, the rapid exit taxiway, the 90-degree turn to the left. You'll see green, yellow, green, yellow, green, yellow. All right, and then you've got the spacings there for it as well. You can see 7.5 meters maximum on a curved line, and on a straight line, 15 meters maximum. And there's a real world example, right? You can very clearly see how those lights are green. And then if you look there towards the left-hand side of the screen, we've got that rapid exit taxiway. You can see how they alternate, right? As you go off the runway, how those lights start alternating green, yellow, green, yellow. It almost looks like red, but it is actually green. It's just now the color that, is playing with your eyes a little bit. It should be green, yellow, green, yellow. Then centerline lights, let's go back. These green lights should be on the centerline. However, they may be offset by not more than 30 centimeters from the centerline, where it is not practicable to locate them on the marking. Like I've said to you, it can be very frustrating when you've got the lights on the centerline because you're trying to taxi with a nose wheel on the centerline. And then it's just cluck, 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 cluck all the time when you taxi across them, right? And it's obviously not ideal for passengers either. So then you have to either taxi off the centerline, or they can move the centerline lights, the taxiway centerline lights, by 30 centimeters offset. But that's the maximum, otherwise you might go off too far. Then on a straight section of taxiway, the centerline lights may not be spaced further than 30 meters. Up to 60 meters spacing may be used if it can be determined that in bad meteorological conditions, adequate guidance can be given by such large spacing. So it's all about the airport specifics. What does the weather look like? They test it to see, will 60 meters work or will it not work? And then they decide, well, how are they going to space the lights in a straight section. And then in less than 350 meters RVR, where the taxiway will be used in conditions of less than that, the spacing of the centerline lights on the taxiway shall not exceed 15 meters. You obviously don't want a pilot to see a light and then with a visibility that is so far he cannot even see the next light. He must be able to see the centerline lights at all times. So there's an example again, back to the picture where you have your maximum spacing there on the centerline. You can see 30 meters maximum. Obviously we know that that can be increased to 60 meters depending on the conditions. Or if the RVR is going to be used as in the previous slide where it's less than 350 meters, then the maximum spacing must be 15 meters and not 30 meters. So it all just depends on how bad or in what is the worst case scenario that you're going to use this airport in. And that's how they decide where to put the lights and how far to put them. Now for a rapid exit taxiway, the centerline light should start at least 60 meters before the curve. So let me show you what I mean with that. There you can see it says 60 meters MNM, meaning minimum. So your rapid exit taxiway light should run for at least 60 meters parallel to the center line lights of the runway before it starts to curve off onto the rapid exit taxiway. And that's once again for the pilots just to pick up the line and to pick up the lights nicely so that they can start making judgment as to how far the rapid exit taxiway is still to come. This is quite a favorite question in the exam, guys. It's 60 meters before the curve. Then for a non-rapid exit taxiway, it's called an other taxiway. The centerline light should not be spaced more than 7.5 meters apart. I think I mentioned this earlier. That's called an other exit taxiway. So it's a non-rapid exit taxiway basically. You can see they're not allowed to space those lights further than 7.5 meters apart. Obviously just because the turn is so sharp. Then edge lights. So now we talk about taxiway edge lights. We know that the centerline lights are green. Okay, if they come off the runway, it's yellow, green, yellow, green. Then edge lights, taxiway edge lights shall be provided on a taxiway to be used at night if the taxiway does not have centerline lights and no other means of sufficient surface illumination can be achieved. The color of taxiway edge lights shall be blue. It's very beautiful. Then the distance, edge lights should be spaced not more than 60 meters apart and on a runway turning pad not more than 30 meters apart. A runway turning pad is, you've maybe seen this, it looks like almost a lollipop towards the end of the runway at the threshold. They have a turning pad. So if you go onto the runway and there are no taxiways, you taxi on the runway, you go all the way towards the threshold, but now if you have to turn around, then they have like a pad there where you can turn around. That's what I'm talking about there. It should not be more than 30 meters apart, the edge lights on the turning pad. So there you can see in the picture once again, gives you all the information. Taxiway edge lights, maximum spacing there on the end. You can see blue at 60 meters maximum. Okay, you don't want more than that. And that's an example of a real world scenario. I mean, you can see the centerline lights there, nice green centerline lights, and then the edge lights, you can clearly see that they are blue. You can see how close those centerline lights are, right? So this, obviously this airport is used in very low visibility conditions. Then starbar lights. These are red lights intended to stop aircraft from entering the runway inadvertently and can be manually or automatically controlled by ATC. And you'll find these lights just before the runway entry point. So at the holding point, when you get to the holding point, you'll typically find the starbar lights over there. And it's red lights that tells you to stop. They usually run across the taxiway, right? And will be put on or off by ATC. It can be done manually or automatically. Then you also have intermediate holding. So where it is required to stop aircraft on a taxiway other than just before the runway. So if you're somewhere on a taxiway and there's lots of other taxiways also crossing, then they have intermediate holding points and intermediate holding lights. Okay, that can be used as well. And these lights are yellow and they are 3 fixed lights spaced 1.5 meters apart. So it's usually yellow lights running across the taxiway. And if they are on, it means you need to stop, right? If they're off, it means you can cross. So there's an example. Let's first talk about the starbar lights. So the one on the left hand side, the description there you can see is omnidirectional starbar lights. Now what does that mean, guys? Omnidirectional means you can see it in many different directions. So if you come from the top of that picture, you would be able to see those red starbar lights on the taxiway. If they're on, it means you need to stop because there's probably an aircraft that's exiting here on the rapid exit taxiway from the runway. Then if you come from the bottom, let's say you've exited the runway and you're taxiing towards those red lights there. If they're on, it means you need to stop, right? So you can see them from the top or from the bottom if they are being put on by ATC. So that means ATC can control the traffic from the bottom of this taxiway and from the top of the taxiway. However, if you look at the other one, the one on the right hand side where I said unidirectional starbar lights, those lights only show in one direction. Okay, so if you get to those lights from, you taxi on the taxiway and then you get and you stop before the runway there where those lights are, you can only see them from that position. If you're on the runway and you exit the taxiway, you won't be able to see those starbar lights because that is not used, right? If you exit the runway, starbar lights are not used. It's only used before entering the runway. So that's why it's called unidirectional, because you can only see them in one direction. The ones on the taxiway, the intermediate holding position there, or the starbars on the taxiway rather, the omnidirectional starbar lights, you can see in both directions on the taxiway. Okay. And then your intermediate holding position lights are those yellow lights here. You can see 3 yellow lights. They're spaced roughly 1.5 meters apart. And those lights will be, if you come on that taxiway towards the runway, let's say there's an aircraft that's coming from the top there or exiting the runway, then ATC might put those yellow lights on for you on the taxiway to say, hey, you must just hold there. That's an intermediate holding position. And then as soon as they're off, it means you can continue taxiing towards the runway to obviously those red starbar lights, which are just before the runway. Okay, so that's how they are used. Then we also get what we call guard lights. Now these are flashing yellow lights which are installed to warn pilots and vehicle operators that they're about to enter the runway. It's like a warning, right? And there are 2 configurations for runway guard lights. The first type is 2 pairs of flashing yellow lights. You have 2 lights on the left hand side of the taxiway, 2 lights on the right hand side of the taxiway, and they flash yellow. Okay, they don't cross the taxiway. The second configuration of guard lights that you get is where they actually cross the taxiway at 3 meters intervals, and then they flash like that. It's also yellow. All right, let me show you what they look like. That's an example of what guard lights look like. You can see how they're flashing, and obviously they continue to flash like that. Your starbar lights would actually be running across the taxiway between these starbar lights, between these runway guard lights, sorry. The starbar lights would be red. So obviously as soon as the starbar lights go off, it means you can enter the runway, but these lights will stay on just to warn you that you are entering a runway. It just gets your attention. So they're called guard lights. Then we get aircraft stand lights. Quite simple, right? We need to know how to enter into the stand, right? Especially if you are flying a big aeroplane. Guidance lights located in the parking and apron areas of an airport shall be yellow, and lights indicating a stop shall be red. So anything that tells you to stop shall be red. And then obviously the lights that are guiding you into the apron, they are yellow lights. Then the spacing on a straight section, the spacing of the lights can be 15 meters in the apron, like a lead-in line or a lead-out line. And then on a curved line, the spacing on a straight line can be 15 meters, but on a curved line, like a lead-in line or a lead-out line, so the line that shows you how to turn into the parking, or the line that shows you how to turn out of the parking, the light spacing is not allowed to be more than 7.5 meters there, the yellow lights. Okay, and then let me show you a picture. That's an example of, you can't really see the lights. You can see slightly the green taxiway centerline lights, but then if you go off the taxiway onto the yellow lines into the parking, you'll see very light yellow lights, and they will take you then into your parking bays. All right. So guys, that's it from my side. This one was quite a mouthful, quite a long one. I hope you've learned something. Remember, like I've said, don't stress too much that you're going to get tested on all these different figures. We just have to give them to you. I have to train you on this so that if you do get questions on them, then you know you can refer back to the video. But take it with a pinch of salt. Watch the video maybe again. Make sure you understand everything. And then, yeah, use this knowledge that you've built up in this video to share with your friends, share with your fellow pilots. This is really stuff that very few pilots actually know about and really understand. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and then we'll see you in the next one.